Hey, Josh, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me back again.
Hey. So we were going to change our personalities for this episode, but we decided it'd be far too much work, and we are just going to stick with what we've got.
There's only so much coffee.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so this is, I think you've now broken the record for most appearances on the podcast by any one person. So from not being on the podcast to breaking the record, how do you feel?
I'm pretty proud of that accomplishment. We're going to knock out a couple more, though, and really set the bar high. But hopefully I'm bringing a ton of value to people out there who are wondering about like Google Ads and pay-per-click and if the platform is right for them. So that's the main thing. If these episodes are providing value, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Not just putting my beautiful face on your podcast.
Yeah. That's something. Okay, let's get right into it. The episode that we're going to be talking about today is the when. So we've covered, the first episode is episode 150. If you just started in this series of episodes about Google Ads and pay-per-click, then go back to episode 150, find out a little bit more about Josh, who's on the podcast right now and was on those episodes. About his story about how he was working with us in our flipping business and talking with motivated sellers, understanding, who they are and what they're looking for as a solution to their real estate problems and needing to sell a house quickly or just wanting to sell a house quickly. And then going into managing our pay-per-click campaigns for us and then taking it to a whole new level and then going to where he's now managing accounts for a lot of the top investors in the country. So he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. You go back and listen to that one for more of that story if you'd like to, and the other episodes, 151, 152. This is episode 153. We're going to be covering the when, and why don't you let us know what that means? What does the when mean?
Yeah, so depending on where you're at in your business, there may be a prime time for you to get started with using Google Ads. I can tell you it's always going to be sooner than later, but there's almost never a bad time to look at including something like a pay-per-click platform as part of your real estate investing business. So for example, like a new investor who's looking to generate more leads that has all of the things that we're going to be covering today in line, they should get started immediately with it because they can start taking advantage of those better quality leads. And for an experienced investor that already has the infrastructure set up in their business who's looking to generate an additional stream of leads coming in, anytime's a good time to get started with it.
Nice. So is PPC really, does it really work for people? And because these are the different situations that in the past I felt like, well, I don't know if this would really work for investors in certain markets, and those certain markets being things like small markets with just not much in the way of search volume, highly competitive large markets, just because the cost per click could go up quite a bit. And then, just people with not a very large budget. Can you address any of those three things that I felt like in the past would pretty much eliminate people in those situations?
Yeah, totally. So Google Ads can work in really any market. The expectation, though, of the amount of budget that needs to be set aside and the amount of overall traffic that's going to come through just needs to be completely thought out. So for example, I've worked with investors in extremely rural markets, like we have to target an entire county to make up a 5,000 person market. But because they're running Google Ads, they're showing up at the top of page number 1. So let's say there's only 4 or 5 leads that are going to come in that month. Well, this person's getting calls on every one of those and is able to turn at least half of them into some sort of deal. So even though the volume is much lower in those more rural or smaller markets, because you're one of the only options there and you're showing up at the very top of the page, you become that go-to person for that specific service. So if there's only 5 total people who need to sell their home for cash in that market a month, you're getting all 5 of those calls or all 5 of those forms filled out.
Yeah.
So that's almost a non-issue, because with budgeting and looking at that too, if you have a smaller budget and you're in a larger market, well, all you have to do is scale back on the amount of volume that you're targeting and be extremely specific with your target market, like all the way down to the zip code level. And you can have an effective ad campaign running with a smaller budget as long as you're specific with your areas and your keyword selections. So there's a ton of different ways to make Google Ads work in smaller markets, to make smaller budgets work in larger markets, and to build success with a lot of different strategies.
Nice. So you figure this out, I'm sure, with people wanting to get the service really bad, and just taking the time to figure out how is this going to work with these different scenarios. So you're not just talking theory, right? You've done this for investors with these situations, right?
Exactly. I've worked with a lot of investors in those exact situations. I've also kind of coached people through that thought process of having the right expectation going in, because for as many people as I have that have signed up and find success in those like smaller markets or larger markets with smaller budgets, I have just as many people who want to do like a Google Ads campaign in Houston and spend $100 a month and generate like 50 leads. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's not exactly how Google Ads works, especially in a market like that where each one of your clicks can be like, $50 or $60 per click. That's 2 clicks a month. That's 2 opportunities a month, and then you're done.
Yeah, that doesn't work. So I guess we'll be getting in this episode more in depth into determining what kind of budget you should be looking at for the goals that you have for your business, right?
Yeah, so what we're going to start laying out next is kind of that foundation for getting started, the expectation you need to have, and what you need to have in place in order to get rolling with a Google Ads campaign.
Okay, so when should people start looking at getting started with pay-per-click through Google Ads?
So you definitely got to have some stuff set up first. Number one, first and foremost, you have to be ready for the volume of leads coming in. So you can't start a Google Ads campaign and not be ready to accept phone calls and follow up with form submissions immediately after they come in. I've worked with a lot of people who didn't understand that getting started, but after that was explained to them, we got everything set up, and they were definitely grateful for it, because with Google Ads taking like inside of a month to get started instead of like 6 to 8 months to get ramped up, you have to know what to expect right from the start. Otherwise, you could end up getting swamped. You could end up paying for leads that are ready to sell, but you didn't pick up the phone or you didn't follow up with them. So the big thing is you have to be ready to intake those leads that you're paying for from the very start. If you're not ready to commit that time to it, then you're not ready to run a Google Ads campaign.
Yeah, and this reminds me of a situation with some friends of mine in Florida who jumped into the business with a lot of money and wanted to scale right away before they had nailed their processes and being able to handle the leads to turn those into deals with maximum efficiency, or even halfway decent efficiency. And it was, dumping a ton of money, I think it was well over $100,000, close to maybe 200,000 into direct mail, which produced a flood of calls, of course, but they weren't able to handle those calls properly. And when that happens, you're not able to answer the calls. You're not able to schedule the appointments soon enough. Any of the real motivated people are going to be lost in the mix of all the people calling in and all this kind of stuff. And that's not to say that you're going to experience the same thing with PPC, where you're going to get a flood of calls like you would with $200,000 spent on direct mail. But being ready to jump on those because of the type of lead they are, right? It's like what we talked about in the last episode, right? Where typically you've got the people that are ready to do something, right?
Yeah, and you have to be ready to provide that solution to that problem that they have. Otherwise, they're going to find somebody else who's ready right then to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have that infrastructure set up first. Be ready to intake leads. So the next thing you need, if you're going to run a Google Ads campaign, you need somewhere to send the traffic to. So you have to make sure that you have a website set up or a landing page that's going to get you notifications on when those submissions are being made to a form or the place that you can put your phone number. And it has to be of good quality. You can't just slap like a web page up that has a form and a phone number on it, right? That's not going to work. Google Ads wants to provide relevant ads just like they want to provide relevant search results also. So you have to have a web page that has some keyword density to it. It has to have some points of interaction on it, even though your main call to action is at the top of that page with like a form and a phone number on it. There still needs to be more to that page in order for it to be a credible resource to send traffic to. So you don't just need a point of access for people to be able to get you that information. It has to function and it has to be optimized in a way that's beneficial to Google Ads.
And do you help people with that? That when you manage their accounts, do you help them set those kinds of pages up with the right, points in there to cover those bases, to cover all the points that you just made of what those pages should have?
Yeah, and that's actually a pretty big time saver for most people, because like for Lead Propeller customers, we're able to go in and help make changes for them. But we're also able to provide them with like lists of recommendations on things that, like resources that they can get and provide to us that we can implement for them, that's going to benefit the page and their ad campaign as a whole. So it's one of those things that's part of like the management that we do and that we actively do just as much as we split test ads or rotate different keywords in. That page it's an important component of the entire Google Ads platform. Even though it exists outside of it, it's a big player.
Yeah, and I would venture to say most people, don't really focus on that aspect of it. It's like, let's just run all the ads to the homepage or something of our website, or even to just another page. But most of those are all just directly same to like one single PPC landing page or something like that. And like you said, that plays a part in the whole ad rank calculation. That helps you to save money. And I think we covered that in the second episode 151.
Yep, that was the one that dove into how the auction works and how that ad rank works, which that landing page experience is a huge part of.
Cool.
So the next thing that somebody's going to need is a trackable phone number. And this is something that like regularly gets overlooked too, because the one thing you want to make sure that you do when you're paying to have the right kind of traffic sent over to your website is that you're able to track every single interaction that you can. And having a separate Google Ads phone number to be used in your call extension on Google Ads and on your website is a way to kind of eliminate any holes that would normally be missed if you just use like a cell phone or a main lead intake number, because you can directly tie those phone calls coming in to your Google Ads campaign.
Yeah, and that's really big to know, because if you are thinking in terms of, well, any form submissions that come through on that landing page, I'm going to be able to track back to AdWords, and I'm going to know how well I did. Well, do you know what the percentage is on average, roughly, of the number of people that call versus submit the form on those websites from AdWords or Google Ads?
So 2 years ago, it was like a 60-40 split, 60 form submissions, 40% phone calls. Last year, it flip-flopped almost exactly the opposite direction. So 60% phone calls and 40% form submissions. This year through Q1, what we saw was that it was still more in line with the 60% phone calls, 40% form submissions. But I think when we do the Q2 analysis, we're going to find that it's almost a 50-50 split, so much more closer to being even. But if half of your leads are clicking on an ad and then calling you directly from the website, you need to know that you paid for those.
Yeah.
So that's normally something that needs to be done from the start. So whether you're brand new or experienced, look at tracking your different marketing methods, especially Google Ads, because you're paying that premium for them.
Yeah, and if you're only looking at the form submission ones, you're looking and saying, well, I only got 3 form submissions, and it cost me this much, and so you're going to have a cost per lead that's way off because you didn't include the 4 or 5 or 6 other calls that actually came in that were actually leads from that same campaign.
Exactly. So the next thing, and one of the biggest ones, is making sure that you have an adequate budget when you're getting started, because a lot of people they want to dip their toe in the water to see if Google Ads is going to work for them, and you can't do that. You can't do that and be competitive. So let's say we'll go back to Houston as an example, right? There's millions of people that are in that market. If you jump in there with a $500 a month budget and you're just dipping your toe in to see how Google Ads is going to work. Well, if the average cost per click there is between $50 and $60, you're only looking at, 10 clicks or so a month, right? That's 10 total opportunities. And maybe one of those turns into a lead or a viable lead that you can reach out to. That's just not the volume that you'd see if you had an adequate budget of, let's say, like $3,000 and a section of Houston, not Houston as a whole. So you have to adequately budget when you're getting started, and not just think that you're going to dip your toe in the water and find success with Google Ads. If you don't budget enough and you have a bad experience just because that budget wasn't set correctly, then it's going to leave a bad taste in your mouth, and you're not going to give the platform the actual chance that it deserves to generate and drive that quality traffic to your site.
Yeah, and this isn't just for Google Ads. I mean, that's just marketing in general, and especially for real estate investors, because we, providing a service that's not needed by as many people as you can maybe sell a widget to, right? Like it's, you can afford to spend more because of the profit potential, the margins, and the deals that we do. And, a lot of beginning investors, getting into any kind of marketing can suffer through this part where they say, well, I'm going to spend $1,000 on direct mail, and they do it. They don't get anything from it. Maybe they get some calls, but they don't get any deals from it. And then all of a sudden they're thinking that money is gone. I threw that away. It was wasted. And if I do that again with another $1,000, I'm going to do the same thing. It's going to be thrown away, wasted, thrown into a black hole. And it's the wrong thinking. But it's just a numbers game, and having the idea of how much you're going to potentially make and then what you're willing to commit to. So how does that look for people, to give them an idea with specifically Google Ads, to come up with some sort of generalized, budget?
Yeah, so there are a lot of 1.5 million markets across the country that we've worked in. That's 1.5 million people total population. And what we found is that in a market of 1.5 million people, it takes roughly $3,000 in order to generate the volume of leads needed to get one deal a month to get started. So that could be 1 out of 10 leads that turns into a deal with that $3,000 budget. And if you're, wholesaling it at a 10 grand commission, or you're doing a fix and flip, that's going to pay for itself within that first month. Mm-hmm. So if you look at that and use that model, you can very safely assume that if you're in a much smaller market, let's say half of that, then it requires half of that budget monthly in order to get started and be effective in Google Ads. If you're in a market that's 2 times larger, then plan on having at least 2 times that in order to market effectively. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you effectively manage a campaign, like if you have the time to put into managing that campaign, looking at keywords, adjusting the timeframes that you're running in, narrowing down or growing your areas, you can get multiple deals with the same amount of budget over time. So
Hmm.
you might start out with like a 1 out of 10 lead to deal ratio, but the more that you refine your account, you can work with that same budget and end up with more deals. So like a 1 to 5 lead to deal instead. So you're doing twice as good. But that requires a lot of time and a lot of management. So when you're getting started, the biggest thing that you can do is make sure to budget effectively and know that what your results are will get better with effective management.
Nice. And I think also something needs to be said for follow-up too, because we're talking in terms of leads that become deals pretty quickly. And, there are multiple investors I know that are doing 100, 200 deals a year and telling me that 40% of their deals are coming from follow-up. 40%. That's insane. But it's true. It's like, it's reality, and they're focused on doing the follow-up, and most investors just aren't very consistent with follow-up. And so these numbers, I think, can be improved even by that. It just kind of like a part of it, like you'll get them those leads, but they're responsible for turning those into deals and following up and turning more of them into deals, right?
Yeah, and when we manage for investors, we work as much as possible to get that lead feedback from them. So what was the quality of those leads? Which ones turned into deals? Which ones didn't? Because we can plug that back into Google Ads and refine that for them. But we also work with them on understanding what their specific process is for their business so that we can work with them or make suggestions on what might help with turning more of those leads into deals. And yeah, what you just said with follow up is totally true, because when we look into different lead propeller accounts that are using the marketing tracking feature, we see that a lot of times the amount of Google Ads leads that they have in their system is different than the amount that's inside of Google Ads. And why is that? It's because we can track, 30 days back and tag those customers who return to the website later as having come through that lead source.
Oh,
So
wow.
if somebody clicks on an ad and goes to the website, but then bounces because they're shopping around or they're just looking at their options right now, if they come back within 30 days and submit the form on there, they'll still be tagged as a Google Ads lead because that's the source that drove them in. And we see that pretty often. It's one of those things where we'll have like 10 leads inside of Google Ads, but then go and check the actual lead list
Mm-hmm.
and see that there's like 15 or 16 actual Google Ads leads. Well, those would have come from months before. So they visited the site, bounced, and then returned. So definitely if you have a form submission, following up with those leads will increase what you're getting out of Google Ads also. Because having that website presence and having a way for people to return to your service is big. It's almost like an automated follow-up salesperson, because it's always going to be there and it's always going to provide a way to contact you. But doing that manual follow-up, like sending those emails or making those phone calls, could increase the amount of viable leads even greater.
Oh, yeah, man, that's awesome. Now, I think some people out there might have heard you say $1.5 million market, budget of maybe 3,000, and are kind of thinking, oh my God, how am I going to spend $3,000 in a month? And I completely remember being at that place where that was just so painful. And it's like, it's such a gamble. It feels like such a huge roll of the dice, but it only takes that one deal to provide that budget to be able to do that month over month and just compound it and build it and just, exponentially grow that investment. And, really when you look at what you're making on these deals, to spend $3,000 to get a deal that if you're doing a rehab, you might be making $30,000-$40,000 on, or a wholesale where you're making 10, 20 or something like that, depending on what your market is. It's just a no-brainer. It's just getting over that initial kind of shock of, like that, if you're not used to, considering what a monthly budget for something like that would be.
Yep. And I can tell you how spot on it is too. So we had a customer a couple of years back who was in a Florida market that spanned a few counties. Because there was so much rural area there, we had to cover multiple counties in order to make up a viable market. And it ended up being $1.5 million market. So we set a a $3,000 a month budget. And, we know that it's probably going to generate between 10 and 15 leads, but one of those is going to turn into that first deal. And so it took us just under 3 months to make $3,000. So in 3 months total, we'd spent $3,000 and gotten 9 leads in. And they were pretty set on just not doing pay-per-click anymore at that point. So we had a conference call, and I let them know that, hey, you're right there at that threshold where you should get that lead that's going to turn into a deal soon. So why don't you hang in there for an extra 2 weeks and just get me some input on the leads that come in. And literally the next day, we got to the $3,100 mark. That 10th lead came in, and that was the deal that funded their marketing for the next 6 months. And that was their first one that came in. And that was the first time that happened. It's actually happened multiple times over the years since that first time. But that's how well dialed in recommendations are with our keyword set and the amount of population inside of markets. So it's an investment up front to make. But it's one of those investments that one deal is going to turn into so much more very quickly after that. You just have to be willing to take a full step and not dip a toe in the water and get started with Google Ads.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think we've pretty much covered the when, right? I mean, do you have anything else that you want to share with anybody about this part of our PPC series?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest overarching thing with all of these, like, you have to be ready to accept leads. You have to have a website set up and online. A trackable number is definitely a very strong recommendation. You have to have enough budget to get started. But like, the big overarching thing is you need time. If you're going to effectively manage a Google Ads account, you're going to need time to put into all of this. So that time to accept the leads coming in, time to get a website set up, time to answer phone calls from that trackable number, and time to effectively manage that budget inside of Google Ads so that you're not overspending or even underspending and not generating enough leads. So time is the other big investment that has to be committed to if you're not going to have a company manage it when you're getting started. That's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And next episode, we're going to be covering the how, which is talking about best practices and KPIs. So what are you tracking? What should you be tracking to make sure that your account is dialed in? And you provide reporting, right? So it's not that anybody that you're managing the account for are going to have to go to their own account and make sense of all of it, right? You provide.
Yeah, we provide reporting, and then we monthly go over those reports on phone calls so that we can help to educate customers on what the numbers actually mean instead of just talking about them, and give them the tools needed so that if they jump into their accounts in the middle of the day, they can make sense of the work that we're doing, why things are showing up for certain searches, why things aren't showing up. And that's a big part of it. So we're going to actually cover some of those higher end KPIs and things that we monitor and that we report on monthly in the next episode.
Nice. And we're still taking on some more accounts. We're recording these episodes closer together, so giving an idea of how many are left wouldn't be accurate because these are going to be spaced out when we actually publish them on the podcast. But I'm sure there might be a couple slots left. If anybody's interested in finding out more about that service that you're providing, how can they get a hold of you?
So you can email me directly at josh@leadpropeller.com. You can tweet at leadpropeller. And if you are looking to get more information on the services themselves that we offer, email services@leadpropeller.com, and that's going to go straight over to me. So we can start a conversation on how we can put a plan together for getting you started with generating better leads online.
Nice. All right, man. Great episode. Good information. And I'm going to say I'll see you later, but I think we're going to record the next one. So
Yeah.
I'll see you in 2 minutes. I won't stop seeing you.
Yeah, thanks
How
for
about that? Nice. Okay, in order to see what Josh is doing right now, you're going to have to go to youtube.com/FlippingJunkie and watch the video of us making faces at each other. All right. Have well, I'll finish. I'll finish out the episode after we're done with the editing. All right.
Sounds good.
All right. See you in a minute.
All right.